There is the row and column function. They're not really that useful on their own. I couldn't really use it for any analysis type work. You might sometimes see them in a nested formula. It helps make your formula dynamic. Let me just show you what row and column do on their own. So here equals row, I'm just going to do the brackets and not enter anything, 14. That's because I'm on row 14, so it returns the number 14. Or I could do equals row, open bracket, and select a cell. So let me just select F1. What do you think it's going to return? Number 1. And that's the same if I do equals row A1. And the same is for column. So equals column. If I just do the brackets, 5, I'm in column E there, so that's the 5th column, equals column, if I do that over there, number 1. A1 is column 1. So it could be useful to use these in some of our formulas. In a previous video, I went through max and min. I can use max to find out my highest value in this range here. And min shows me my minimum, my lowest figure. And then I went through large and small. So for large, I selected that range again, but I specified the number here as number 2 because I want the second largest. If I were to enter the number 1, that would actually give us our max. And the same here for small. I selected the range and wrote the number 2 because I want the second smallest. And again, if that was the number 1, it would actually be the same as our min. And then down here, you could do large, select the range and type the number 3. It would be a bit of a pain to keep changing that number if I wanted the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th largest in that cell. I'd have to keep manually type in those numbers for each one. I would want a formula I could just drag down, because when I drag this down, it just keeps that number as 3. It's not 4, 5, 6. I do have to manually go in and change it. That's where you could use row or column depending how you set up your data, but I tend to work in rows. I'm just going to write the large function here. We're going to use large 1 as our max rather than having max and min, then our large and small function. To make it a bit easier, I'm going to write the row formula separately before we incorporate it into the large function. So here I'm going to say equals row, open bracket. I'm just going to select cell D1. So when I select D1, it's returning 1. I'm not using any dollar signs, so when I drag that down, I'll get a list of 1 to 10. That's row D1, you can see up there, 2, 3, and I can just drag down. So that's why it's returning those numbers. So I could say equals large, select the range. I'm going to absolute reference it by pressing our F4 key because I'm dragging this down, so I don't want that range to move, comma, and my value, rather than writing the number 1 for the highest, I could select that there, and that's going to return me my number 1. Close bracket. Drag it down, and you can see I get these values here as well. So there are top 10. Obviously, I could have just written numbers 1 to 10 here. I just want to show you a simple example of how you use the row and column. So if we look at our formula here, equals large, the array, and then C5, where we have our number 1. So in C5, we have this formula here, row D1. Rather than referencing that cell there, I could have actually written row D1 here. Let's just do that. I'm just going to copy that part of the formula, copy, and overtype this. And I just drag it down again, and I should get the same results. And I do. So let's just write this from scratch. Equals large, array, the range of values here, F4 to absolute reference that range, comma, and my number is going to be row, open bracket, D1, just to get that number 1. Close bracket on the row and then close bracket on the whole formula. And I could do the same for small. Equals small, array, that's our range here, F4 to absolute reference. We want to return the number 1 for the smallest, the lowest. Rather than writing the number 1 here, we're just going to reference the row number 1. And we're going to just choose this row here. Close bracket and close bracket, enter. And we can just see that those are our 3 there, so that looks correct. And when we go down our rows, when we dragged it down, you can see that it's selecting, it's moving down a row each time as well. Just to show you another example, and you might want to look at my basic formatting dates video, there's a formula called end of month. So I just want a list of all the months of the year, the last day of each month. So I can use end of month for that. Let me just show you an example first of all. So equals end of month. Start date is this date. And I actually want the end of that month there, January. So my number of months here, I'm going to select 0. And it returns me the 31st of January. If I absolute reference that start date with an F4, you would think that I might be able to drag this down and it might then give me February, March, April, May, June, July. But it doesn't. That month number is static. So again, I could use my row to fulfill that entry. So let's just do that. Equals end of month, start date, here I'm going to absolute reference that now, comma, months, my number of months. So I don't want to write a value in, I want it to be dynamic. So I can use row, and that's going to be, I will have to adjust it at the end, but I just want to do the simple formula first. Row, and like we did before, I'm just going to select this here. Or I could select A1, it doesn't matter. But I'm just going to select the one above here. And I don't need any dollar signs. I'm just going to close the bracket there, close it again, enter. And then when I drag it down, just drag it down one more, I get my February, March, April, May, all the way to December, all my end of month dates. The only adjustment I need to make is that this started in February because we used number 1 to add on to January. I need to make an adjustment there of -1. So we actually start at 0 to include this month here. So then when I drag it down, I get all my months and the end of those months, January to December. So you can also make these adjustments rather than choosing the first row. Let's just do it again over here. Equals large, this range, F4, comma, row, and we're going to reference just the row that we're on here. Let's close it, then see what adjustment we need to make. Okay, so because it's 5, it's going to give us the 5th largest. So I just need to make an adjustment of -4. And then that gives us our list. If you want to remain in your data range rather than always selecting the top row, you can just use the row that you're on and then make the adjustment. So from each of these, you're always deducting 4. Because we're not referencing the first row, we're referencing the 5th. So we want to deduct 4 from each of these. So if I do equals row -4, that's what you get. There is also rows with an S and columns with an S. I don't really use those that often. I tend to use the row if I need to make this sort of adjustment to my formula where I want it to be dynamic. There's also choose rows and choose cols. I'm going to have a video on choose because I occasionally use choose on its own. So there's rows, and what this does, I needed to select a range. You can see on that screen tip there, it says 9 rows, 1 column. So if I just press enter there, 9. I selected 9 rows there. And the same for columns, equals columns, pick one with the S on the end, and my array is this, 3 columns.